You know what your problem is? Your problem is you're somehow making this all about you. Mesm had been talking all night. He was right. I was doing just that. Funny how having some fool dwarves think you're some kind of hero will do that to you. Oh, and when all the leaders of your people, along with the leaders of elves and goblins, are trying to hunt you down, it kind of makes you think that it does somehow involve you. Sure, yeah, some folks think you're a hero, and some folks want you dead. But what you don't actually see is there's a lot more humans, elves, goblins, and even dwarves that don't care a thing about you. Actually, most of them. So many, in fact, compared to it, the number of people that know about your existence is so close to zero, it might as well be. Hey, Dayton, you care about this dwarf? What? Huh? You see, Mesm was an okay guy. Over the past few days, we'd spent quite a bit of time together in the Lone City Mead Hall in Bearded Arrows, both of us trying to figure out our next move. Mesm liked to talk. Tell the truth, I don't think he had shut up for a minute since I arrived. That was okay. It meant I didn't have to come up with stuff to say. You say that you just want to serve the dwarves of the Syrups of Onslaught. Are you doing that now? Is Avi? Nah, she's up in some tree somewhere hiding. She's mad at you because she thinks you ruined her rebellion. Is Latast? Nah. He's also up in some tree right now hiding. He's mad at you because he thinks you ruined his chance for power. Is Uzbu? Nah. He's happy as a Kia with an unguarded trade wagon right now. He's mad at you because the goblins have told him to be. Everybody involved in this is just me. Who's doing anything for the Syrups right now? I wanted to tell him the Syrups were dead. Every dwarf I'd run across since I left Standard Hours was defeated or dead. I'm the only one as far as I was concerned, and I was doing something for the Syrups. The last Syrup. He wanted a cup of mead, and I was giving him just what he wanted. What your people need right now is some kind of inspiration. You're a hero to some dwarves, but they need a hero of the dwarves. No, a hero of the North. And I know just how to do that. Mesm's plan was simple, straightforward, and had a very high likelihood of getting us all killed. The people of the North had made enemies of each other for sure, but they all had a common enemy. Doesn't matter if you're an elf, a human, a dwarf, or even a goblin, you're far more likely to be killed or your home destroyed by a dragon or a rock than by your more civilized neighbor. Those are just the numbers. Right now, in the Syrups land, you currently had the dragon Slack a Diamond Tax in Judge Letter, the dragon Berry Parchot in Pull Stakes, the Forgotten Beast Suat Puzzling Vales in Pattern City, and Ragholes was destroyed by a rock just a few years back. Not to mention all the other beasts roaming about. Even if we could take one down, well, he'd reckon that would inspire and rally the dwarves more than Eteb riding around with his promises ever had. All four, and every dwarf, elf, human, and goblin for the next 1,000 years would know our names. That's at least what Mesm was wanting out of it. Immortality. At least that's the best I could figure. What did I want? I just wanted a purpose. And I suppose this one would work. I was starting to think that he was getting ready to make this all about me. Next morning, Mesm and I headed out. Tayden and Ithra, two of Mesm's companions, headed off with us. Judge Letter was the first Dwarf Fortress, and Slacka the Dragon had killed Moses Bronze Lances, the first Dwarf Queen. She'd been holed up in there for over 100 years. Mesm figured that'd be the best way to start off our story. A grand, poetic statement. What better way to announce the Syrup's return than by avenging the original queen and taking back our first fortress? Sounded good a place to die as any, and it happened to be the closest. We arrived at Judge Letters as the sun was setting. The darkness didn't help the old abandoned fortress feel any less creepy, less empty. Ithra pointed out the quiet. No birds, crickets, nothing. That didn't help either. We made our way down. I don't even know how far down the stairs went. I'd heard that original dwarves had built their fortresses deep down in the earth, and now I was getting a good picture of what that meant. Tayden had started complaining about how much work it was going to be to climb back up. as if that was something we'd even have to worry about. When we reached the main floor, it was dead quiet. Old statues, artifacts covered with dust and scorch marks. We looked around. Couldn't be too hard to find a dragon in here. I, Sil Arkoth, scholar of the Windy Tomes and proud member of the awe-inspiring standards, would like to make an interjection at this point. I realize the upcoming accounts are going to cause a little bit of controversy amongst some dwarven scholars, as the descriptions of the events that Rootercrystals provide conflict quite a bit from other historical accounts and the songs of the bards. It is not my intention to contradict these stories, nor to paint any historical figure in any sort of light, good, bad, or otherwise. I'm just recording what I am learning, as objectively as possible. On a more personal note, I find both scholars and bards to be quite susceptible to hyperbole, while Rootercrystals' words seem to downplay events more often than not. The truth, I believe, probably lies somewhere in between. We reached a floor of bedrooms and began peeking at each one, and then, there she was. Slack and Diamond Tax, the sparks of healing, bane of the syrups of onslaught and murderer of their first queen, curled up in a bedroom, asleep. We all stood there frozen for what seemed like forever. Then we just kind of looked at each other. This isn't what we expected at all. Mesm gestured at me with his head, nodding toward the sleeping dragon. Go ahead, do it, he seemed to say, without saying words. So, I did it. Took my spear, let it sink in, right between the eyes. Slack and Diamond Tax, the sparks of healing, was no more. The human sure seemed happy. Mesm took the time to take her head and strap it to his back. We'd be needing it later to show the hillocks, the proof of our brave, heroic deed. Certainly didn't feel like the start of a heroic story to me, but what do I know? On the way back up to the surface, Mesm obviously saw that I was fighting this in my head. Don't worry about it, friend. Circumstances eat themselves. What we have here is a dead dragon. The beast that has threatened the North for 100 years is no more. Slain by the spear of Shem Rootercrystals. That's what happened. Those are the facts. That's all that matters. He slapped my back and moved on forward, walking in front of me. I could see Slack's head strapped to his back, her eyes looking at me, still with that surprised expression. I bet this part won't make it into the bard songs. Pattern City and the Forgotten Beast Suat Puzzling Vales was the next closest fortress. Dimpled Ink was on the way, and although it, like standard hours, was under the control of the Sin of Twigs, there were old syrup dwarves still living there. Mesm said we had to stop by. The stories wouldn't spread across the world if they weren't bragged about and declared. The handful of dwarfs in Dimpled Ink weren't impressed by our grand entrance. Their eyes did get big, though, when Mesm dropped Slack's head down in the middle of the mound. Slack a Diamond Tax, the sparks of healing, is dead. Slain by the spear of Shem Rootercrystals, the abysmal flesh of pillars. We now move on to slay the other great beasts of this land. Mesm, always the showman. That should do it. A week from now, that story will be all over the world, and all the details will be filled in for us. Pattern City was founded by Queen Dobar Caberknives in the year 12, and its construction is known to be the cause of the wars with the elves. It's also famous for being destroyed 20 years later by a forgotten beast we were getting ready to face. Pattern City's architecture was very similar to that of Judge Letter. Not surprising, I suppose. We searched through the web-coated halls looking for any sign of Suet. We didn't really know what we were looking for. A dragon is a dragon, but a forgotten beast is a term usually given to creatures that deny all other classifications. Then, we found it. Well, at least I think we found it. It looked like a giant worm of some sort. Feathers all over it, but big and bloated, and just laying there. It was alive. We could tell from the horrible guttural sounds coming from it, and the slight twitching and expansion of the blob as these sounds were produced. It didn't pay us any mind. Just sat there, floating away. And the smell, oh, well. We approached it, and it looked like it was trying to get up, but then it would just let out a bloated sigh and fall right back down. The humans charged it, hitting it, kicking its shell, to little effect. At one end, I could see its mouth, or what I guessed was its mouth, and I threw my spear into it. It let out one last bloated, gassy sound, and then it lay still, dead. I couldn't imagine how this thing could have taken out a whole fortress. Perhaps it had seen better days. Perhaps old Suet and I had a lot more in common than I'd thought. Suet had given up. Had I stayed in Bearded Arrow, I might end up much the same. I did this guy a favor. Mesm plucked one of his large taupe feathers and fastened it beside Slack's head. 2 fortresses down, 1 to go. The fortress of Pullstakes was a bit further to the north. We'd have to travel through the Goblin lands. Shouldn't be too much of a problem, just a bit of an annoyance. Pullstakes was a short-lived fortress, built by Dastot Banded Traded in 41, shortly after the fall of Pattern City. It would fall to the Dragon Barrier Parchot 10 years later. Quite the foul beast, she'd attack sites all across Sil Arkoth, from the nearby Goblin and Dwarven holds all the way to the lands of the Southern Dwarves. We snuck quietly through the halls. As we were checking the sleeping halls to the north, we heard a small commotion to the west. We circled around, trying to get behind the sound. I opened up a door, and there she was. Barry Parchot, silvery luxuries. She wasn't sleeping, she wasn't bloated and defeated, she was surprised. I quickly thrust my spear, hit her in the upper body. She spewed fire, missed. She charged through the doorway. I jumped away. I threw my spear into her neck, and she fell to the ground. I grabbed my spear, thrust it into her head. She went down. As we were leaving Pullstakes, I wasn't feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. These 3 beasts had demolished entire fortresses, murdered hundreds, and have terrorized the countryside since the beginning of time. In the past few days, we'd cleaned them all out without so much as a scratch. Didn't seem right. Mesm must have been able to read my thoughts. There's a story my people tell about a large stone in the middle of a road outside of a hamlet. The stone was the source of many troubles. Tipping wagons, tripping horses. Many people complained about it for years. They'd talk in the tavern every night about the latest problem caused by this big rock. Then one day, a young outsider came through town, saw the stone, and with very little effort, just moved it off the road. Why didn't somebody else move the stone? Tayden asked. It's kind of the point of the story, Tayden. I saw what he was saying. Here I was feeling all guilty about how easy this had been. Compared to what? No one else had ever done this before. Maybe this was exactly how hard it was supposed to be. We headed up north where the rock nests were rumored to be. Didn't take long to find one. They were a bit tougher than some of the other beasts we'd encountered, but their size made them really easy to hit, and once they were on the ground, they were just more stones to move out of the road. Soon, Neiman Steenglade, the Simple Flame, and Apache Stonemost, the Persuasion of Deer, were no more. As the last rock let out its last breath, Mesm said it was time we started out our grand victory tour. We'd travel to the hillocks, towns, forest retreats, and even the dark pits if they'd let us, announcing what we'd done. I still felt I had at least one more beast to deal with, and if all went to plan, we'd face him at the first stop. Standard Hours was just to the south, and it would be where we would stop first. There wasn't a huge crowd to meet us, no parade, just a couple dwarves, if you could even call them that, hanging out in the civic mound, looking at the floor. They wouldn't even talk to us, let alone make eye contact. When Mesm threw down the collection of feathers and dragon heads before them, I swear I saw what looked like a glimmer of hope in their eyes. Apparently, when the goblins had elevated Uzbu to the crown, they didn't actually tell him about it. They made the proclamation from far off. The list of folks waiting to get in on killing a syrup king was a long one. The list of folks waiting to kill a syrup puppet king put there by the goblins was even longer. Ever since, Standard Hours had been a mess. Groups come through here all the time looking for him, pillaging through the houses, threatening the dwarves, sometimes beating them. They figured we were the same until they saw the trophies. They said Uzbu took off a while ago. They didn't know where. They figured he was hiding off somewhere in the woods to the west, as there wasn't anyone in the north that would take him in. We went off to the west looking for him. Before we reached Standard Hours, I had every intention of ramming my spear through his chubby little body and adding his head to the pile. Now, not so much. I was actually feeling a bit of pity for him. Maybe we could make something work. Maybe there was a way to redeem this dwarf and he'd have some place in the upcoming rise of the Syrups. We noticed some smoke coming from a nearby valley. As we approached, we could see a tent set up with a fire burning outside. We figured this was probably Uzbu's hiding place. Now we'd have to figure out what to do with him. But when we looked into the tent, we saw that decision was already made for us. Editor's note. There are many historical accounts and stories that claim Rootercrystals did strike down Uzbu Hushjackal, the Pretender. While it does make sense to think that Rootercrystals would not record such an act of murder in his own journal, in all honesty, I, as a scholar, can't help but make note of how candid and honest he is about his thoughts and feelings, and rarely, if ever, whitewashes any situation to make himself look better. For example, I have included in this work an appendix, where Rootercrystals goes on for 5 pages, vividly and colorfully describing his bodily functions after a long night of drinking at the mead hall. He'd been run through something awful. No sign of who got him. Elves, goblins, dwarves, didn't really matter. Guess that was one less king for the Syrups. Now we had even more news to pass on. Ragholes, where the blockaded diamond was stationed, was just to the south, so we headed that way. Ragholes had traditionally been a source of surprises for me whenever I'd visit. I didn't know why I thought it would be any different this time. Mesm gave his performance, touting our deeds, this time to a room of eager ears. He looked like he was in his element. Then, Thofala Erndwendled, mayor of Ragholes, addressed me as Shem Rootercrystals, the abysmal flesh of pillars, king of the Syrups of Onslaught. I knew better than to argue. Getting caught back up on news, there was none. At least none that we weren't a part of. Apparently all the news was me, killing monsters. Just as Mesm said it would be. I was the king, it turns out, because I was the only one left. Avi was gone. Latast, no one heard from him. Uzbu, now dead. I was the last Syrup, or at least the last one that would admit it. I'd said it before, but always just figuratively, with a hint of irony. Now it seems everyone else was saying it too. The last Syrup. Well, that just ain't gonna work. When we left Ragholes, our mission had changed, or at least mine had. We visited the remaining dwarven hillocks, telling our stories, and I managed to gather up a group of 7 hardy dwarves. I gave them their mission. For years now, we've had figure after figure lamenting about the fall of the Syrups, and talking about how we need to rise again. About time someone pulled this stone from the road. That's what we're going to do. And so ends the journal of Shem Rootercrystals, the abysmal flesh of pillars, king of the Syrups of Onslaught. It is supposed that this journal was handed over to the group of 7 mentioned earlier on the founding of Syruphold, along with all the beast trophies and other effects. We have not yet discovered any other writings from Rootercrystals, only official correspondences and edicts from this point forward. It may be possible that no more exist, but I like to think that Rootercrystals would keep journaling, and someday we will run across another. Perhaps when I, Sil Arkoth, scholar of the Windy Tomes and proud member of the awe-inspiring standards, travel up north to continue my studies.